The pen didn't shake. That was the thing nobody would ever talk about later. When Damian Cross ended his marriage, his hand was completely still. No hesitation, no pause. Just the quiet scratch of a Mont Blanc pen, cutting through silence like a blade. Outside, Manhattan glittered. The Hudson River caught the last of the evening sun and threw it back like it meant nothing. Like everything was fine. Like a man wasn't sitting 40 floors up, signing away the mother of his unborn child. Damien set the pen down and leaned back in his chair. His office smelled like leather and power. Floor-to-ceiling glass. A desk that cost more than most people's cars. Everything in this room said, "I won." Everything in this room said, "Nothing touches me." He slid the envelope across the desk to his lawyer without looking up. "You have it delivered tonight." His voice was flat, calm, final. His lawyer nodded, picked up the envelope, and left without a word. Because that's what you do when a man like Damien speaks. You move. You don't ask questions. Damien turned back to the window. He told himself this was business. He told himself Savannah had become a distraction. Too quiet, too soft, too much feeling in a world that ran on numbers. He had an empire to protect. Weakness had no place here. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the woman he just discarded was worth more than everything he had ever built. Combined. But we'll get to that. Right now, across the city, in a quiet apartment that didn't match her real worth, Savannah Whitmore sat by a window. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pacing. She was still. The kind of still that takes years to learn. The kind of still that only comes when you already know how the story ends. Her hand rested on her stomach. 5 months. A life growing quietly inside her, just like everything else about Savannah. Hidden, patient, waiting. The city moved below her window, sirens, lights. A million people going somewhere fast. She went nowhere. She just sat there, and she waited. Because here's what Damian Cross didn't understand about the woman he just threw away. She had never needed him. Not once. Not his money, not his name, not his empire or his skyline office or his cold, beautiful face. She had something bigger waiting for her. Something her father had built in silence over decades. Something so large, so powerful, that even the word billionaire didn't cover it. Lord Damien had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he was smiling while he did it. Stay with me, because what happens next, nobody saw coming. Not Damien, not his lawyers, not Wall Street, nobody. People always underestimate quiet women. That was their first mistake. Savannah Whitmore had been quiet her whole life, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood something most people never learn. The person who talks the least in the room is usually the one who sees the most. And Savannah had seen everything. She had watched Damien change. Not overnight. It never happens overnight. It happens slowly, the way a fire dies. First, the flame gets smaller, then the warmth disappears. Then one day you reach for the heat and there's nothing there but cold ash. She remembered the exact moment she knew. It was a Tuesday, or 8 months ago. She had cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta, candles on the table. She had worn the blue dress he once said made her eyes look like the ocean. Damien had walked in, looked right through her, sat down, checked his phone, eaten in silence, and left the table without a single word. Not even a glance at the dress. She had sat there alone, twirling pasta around her fork, and she had thought, okay, now I know. She didn't cry that night. She made a decision. That was the difference between Savannah and the woman Damian thought she was. He thought she was fragile. He thought her silence was weakness. He thought her stillness meant she had no moves left to make. He was wrong about all of it. Savannah had grown up watching her father move in silence. A man who never raised his voice. A man who never needed to. Yet because when you hold the kind of power her father held, you don't announce yourself. The world already knows. The world already adjusts. She had learned from the best. Now she stood in Damian's world, his office, his city, his rules, and she let him believe he was winning. She let him think the quiet woman by the window was broken. She let him hand that envelope to his lawyer and feel like a king. Kings make the worst mistakes when they feel untouchable. She turned from the window slowly. Her reflection caught in the glass for just a second. A woman in a simple dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry, no performance. Just a woman who knew exactly who she was. And that was the most dangerous thing in that room. Not Damian's pen, not his lawyer, not his empire or his 40-floor view, her. Because while Damian was ending a marriage, and Savannah was ending a chapter. And there is a massive difference between these two things. A marriage ends and someone loses. A chapter ends and the real story begins. Savannah picked up her bag, walked to the door, and didn't look back. She never needed to. The best move she ever made was letting him think he'd won. And trust me, he had no idea what was coming. Every powerful family has a secret. The Whitmore family had the biggest one in the world, and almost nobody knew it. Not the press, not Wall Street, not the Forbes list that tracks the richest people on the planet. Because the Whitmore wealth didn't live in headlines. It didn't sit in stock markets or tech companies or flashy real estate towers with names carved in gold above the entrance. It lived in silence. Built over 3 generations, it passed down not through noise but through discipline, through patience, through the kind of long-term thinking that most people can't even imagine because they're too busy chasing the next quarter's numbers. Savannah's grandfather had started it with nothing but land and vision. Her father had turned that land into something the world had never seen. Quiet deals, private holdings, influence so deep it didn't need a name on a building to be felt. He was a trillionaire, not a billionaire, not close to a billionaire, a trillionaire. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to show itself. The kind of wealth that moves governments, that shapes industries, that sits behind the curtain while everyone else fights for the spotlight. And Savannah was his only daughter, his only child, the sole heir to everything. And now here's what made this extraordinary. Damian Cross, one of the most powerful CEOs in America, a man who built a tech empire from a dorm room, a man with a team of lawyers and analysts and intelligence consultants who tracked everything, had no idea. None. He had married Savannah Whitmore and never once looked deeper than the surface. Never questioned why a woman so simple, so quiet, so unbothered by his wealth had agreed to a prenup without a single negotiation. Never wondered why she never asked for anything. Never noticed that she never flinched at his numbers, because her numbers made his look like pocket change. She had let him lead, let him perform, let him believe he was the powerful one in the marriage. And every single day she had sat across from him at that expensive dinner table, in that expensive apartment, surrounded by his expensive things. And she had said nothing. Because what do you say? Darling, your $1 billion is cute. My father makes that before breakfast. No. That's not who Savannah was. She wasn't raised to perform power. She was raised to be it. And the beautiful, painful, almost poetic truth was this. If Damien had just loved her, none of what was coming would have happened. If he had just seen her. Really seen her. But he didn't. He looked at a quiet woman and saw a liability. He signed the papers and called it a win. And in doing so, he didn't just lose a wife. He lost the greatest opportunity of his entire life. The question now is, what happens when the world finds out? Because it will find out. It always does. The envelope arrived at 7:43 p.m. Savannah knew it was coming. She had known for weeks. But knowing something is coming and actually watching it arrive at your door are two completely different things. The courier was young. Couldn't have been more than 22. He handed her the envelope without making eye contact, like he knew what was inside. Like he felt bad about it. She signed for it with a steady hand, closed the door quietly, and stood there in her hallway for a long moment, envelope in hand. The kettle whistling softly from the kitchen, like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just delivered the official end of her marriage in a FedEx envelope. She walked to the kitchen, set the envelope on the counter, made her tea. That was Savannah. That had always been Savannah. Not because she didn't feel anything, but because she refused to let pain make her messy. Her mother had taught her that. Feel everything, she used to say, but let nothing own you. She carried her tea to the window and sat down. 5 months pregnant, alone in an apartment that suddenly felt quieter than usual. The baby moved, just slightly, just enough, and Savannah placed her hand on her stomach and closed her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I know." She sat there for a long time. And here is what she didn't do. She didn't call anyone in a panic, didn't post anything, didn't break down on the kitchen floor, didn't stare at old photos or read through old messages searching for the moment it all went wrong. She already knew the moment. She had known for months. What she felt right now wasn't heartbreak. It was something quieter, something heavier. It was grief. The specific kind of grief that comes not from losing someone, but from finally accepting that you lost them a long time ago and you've just been waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Damian hadn't loved her in over a year, maybe longer. And the saddest part? She had stayed, not because he was weak, but because she was carrying his child and she had genuinely believed, that one day he would look at her the way he used to. That one day the man she married would come back. He never did. So tonight, sitting by the window with her tea going cold and the envelope still unopened on the counter, Savannah Whitmore let herself feel it. All of it. The love, the loss, the loneliness, the years. She let herself feel it completely. And then she set it down. Like putting something heavy on a shelf. Done. Because tomorrow was a different kind of day. Tomorrow the grief was done and the real work began. She looked out at the city one last time. "Okay," she said softly. To herself, to the baby, to whatever came next. Okay. She had no idea that tomorrow, one phone call would change absolutely everything. The phone rang at 6 a.m. exactly. Not 6:01, not 5:59, 6 o'clock sharp. Savannah was already awake. She had barely slept. The envelope still sat on the counter, now open. The papers spread out like a quiet confession. She had read every word the night before. Every cold, legal, carefully worded sentence that reduced 4 years of marriage to a document. She saw the caller ID, and everything inside her went still. Not the scared kind of still. Not the anxious kind. The knowing kind. She had been waiting for this call. Not today specifically. Yeah, but she had always known it would come. Her father had told her years ago, "When it's time, you'll know. And when you know, I'll call." She pressed the phone to her ear. Savannah. One word. Just her name. But the way he said it carried everything. It carried weight. History, love, and something else. Something she recognized immediately. "It's time. Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard." A pause. Short, but full. "Are you all right?" She looked down at her stomach. Felt the baby shift. Thought about the envelope on the counter. Thought about Damian's steady hand signing away their marriage without blinking. "I'm okay," she said. And for the first time in months, she meant it. Her father's voice was calm. It was always calm. This was a man who had negotiated with presidents, so who had restructured entire economies from a single boardroom, who had built something so vast, so powerful, that most people didn't even know his name, because that was exactly how he wanted it. "Come home," he said. "It's time to stop hiding." Savannah closed her eyes. Hiding. That was the word that hit her. Because that's exactly what she had been doing, not intentionally, not dishonestly. But she had spent 4 years living small inside Damian's big world, folding herself down, making herself quieter, softer, smaller, trying to fit into a space that was never built for a woman like her. She had hidden her name, hidden her worth, hidden who she really was because she had loved a man who she thought would love her back the same way. He hadn't. And now her father was on the phone at 6 in the morning telling her to come home, to stop hiding, to finally, after all this time, step forward. "Okay," she said softly. "The jet is ready," he replied. No drama, no fanfare, just logistics. Because when you are who her father was, a private jet at dawn was simply a Tuesday. She hung up, stood in her kitchen in the early morning quiet. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Savannah Whitmore smiled. Not a sad smile, not a bitter one, a real one. Because the woman who had been living in the shadows was finally walking toward the light. And God help anyone standing in her way, especially the man who thought he had already won. She packed one bag, just one. Not because she didn't have more. The closet was full. 4 years of a billionaire's wife living a billionaire's life. The clothes, the shoes, the things that come with that world, on all of it sitting there, waiting. She looked at it for a long moment and left it all behind. She took only what was hers before Damian, before the marriage, before the Manhattan apartment and the black card and the charity dinners where she smiled perfectly and said the right things to the right people. One bag. The person she was before all of this. She zipped it up and carried it to the door. Then she stopped, turned back, walked to the counter where the divorce papers sat, picked them up slowly and looked at them one final time. Every page, every line. His signature at the bottom, bold, clean, certain. The signature of a man who had no doubt, a man who thought he had just freed himself from something small. She set the papers back down. And here is the moment that would have broken most women. 5 months pregnant, yes, standing alone in a kitchen at dawn, holding the physical proof that the man she loved had thrown her away without hesitation. This was the moment to cry, to scream, to call someone and fall apart completely. Savannah did none of that. She looked at his signature one last time and thought, "You have no idea." Not anger, not revenge. Just a quiet, absolute certainty. You signed the wrong papers, Damian. Because what he didn't know, what his lawyers didn't know, what nobody in his entire world knew, was that buried inside the Whitmore family holdings were interests in three of Damian's biggest business partners. Silent stakes, invisible on the surface, the kind of financial architecture that takes decades to build and seconds to activate. Her father had never interfered, never needed to. But the moment Savannah said the word, everything would move. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, opened it. The hallway was empty and bright and smelled like the rest of the building. Expensive, neutral, lifeless. The kind of place where feelings weren't allowed because feelings were inconvenient. She stepped out. Didn't look back at the apartment. Didn't take one last look at the skyline view that had cost Damian $4 million. Didn't linger. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Watched the apartment door disappear as the doors closed. And exhaled. Long, slow, complete. Like putting down something she had been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. The lobby, the door, the morning air hitting her face, cool and sharp and honest. A black car was waiting. The driver nodded once, opened the door. He said nothing. She got in. The city moved past the windows as they drove. And somewhere across that same city, Damian Cross was sleeping, completely unbothered, completely unaware that the ground beneath his empire had just started to shift. And it would keep shifting until everything he built was standing on sand. The jet was white and unmarked. No logo, no name. Nothing on the outside that said who it belonged to or where it was going. Just a clean, quiet aircraft sitting on a private runway outside the city like a secret waiting to be told. Savannah stepped out of the car and looked at it. She had grown up around things like this. Private jets, private islands, private everything. But she had spent 4 years pretending that world didn't exist. 4 years taking taxis and flying commercial and splitting dinner bills with Damian's assistant just to seem normal. Just to seem like a regular woman who had married well. The performance was over now. The pilot nodded as she boarded. The cabin was simple. Cream leather, warm lighting, a small table with water and fresh fruit already waiting. Her father's people didn't do flash. They did quality. There was a difference. Flash said, "Look at me." Quality said, "I don't need you to look." She sat down, buckled in, felt the engines hum to life beneath her. And something inside her hummed back. Like recognition. Like a part of herself she had locked away in a quiet room for 4 years was finally hearing the key turn in the door. As the jet lifted into the morning sky, Savannah opened her bag and pulled out a single folder. Her father had sent it 3 weeks ago. She had read it once and put it away because, at the time, she wasn't ready. She was still hoping, still holding the door open for Damian to walk back through and be the man she had married. He never came. So now she read it again. Page 1. A full breakdown of the Whitmore holdings. Numbers so large they looked fictional. Interests across 6 continents. Infrastructure. Energy. Private equity so deeply embedded in the global economy that removing it would cause shockwaves in a dozen industries. Page 2. The part that would make Damian's blood run cold. 3 of his most critical business partners. The men he trusted. The deals he had built his last 2 years of growth on. Silent Whitmore interests sat inside all 3. Invisible, patient, legal, placed there years before Savannah had ever met Damian Cross. Her father hadn't planned this. He wasn't that kind of man. It was simply the nature of money at that level. It touches everything eventually. but it meant one thing very clearly. Damien's empire and the Whitmore legacy were already connected. He just didn't know it yet. Savannah closed the folder, looked out the window at the clouds beneath her. She wasn't going to destroy him. That was never the plan. Destruction was loud and messy and beneath her. What she was going to do was simply emerge. Step out of the shadow. Take her seat at the table. Be exactly who she had always been. And let the world recalibrate around that truth. Damian would feel it. His partners would feel it. The entire industry would feel it. Not as an attack, as a correction. She placed her hand on her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered to her baby. "We're going home." And home was about to remind the world exactly who the Whitmore name belonged to. The Whitmore estate sat on 400 acres. No gates with gold letters. No fountain at the entrance trying to impress visitors. Just a long, quiet driveway lined with old trees so tall they blocked the sky. The kind of driveway that said, "Whoever lives here doesn't need to prove anything to you." Savannah hadn't been here in 4 years. 4 years. The moment the car turned through the entrance and those trees closed in on both sides, something in her chest cracked open. Not in a painful way. In the way that a window cracks open after a long winter and lets the first real air in. She was home. Her father was waiting at the door. Not inside. Not in his study surrounded by advisors and phones and the machinery of his empire. At the door. Standing there like a regular father waiting for his daughter to come home. He looked older, just slightly. The way people you love always look older when you haven't seen them in too long and time has been moving without your permission. Savannah stepped out of the car, and for the first time since all of this started, she broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the quiet, unstoppable kind of tears that come when you finally feel safe enough to fall apart. When you've been holding everything together for so long that the moment someone who truly loves you opens their arms, your body simply surrenders. Her father held her without saying a word. Just held her. His hand on the back of her head like she was still his little girl. Like the years and the marriage and the divorce papers and the loneliness had never happened. They stood there for a long time. Finally, he pulled back, looked at her face, then looked down at her stomach, and something moved across his expression. Something deep and complicated. Love, anger, grief, and underneath all of it, a fierce, quiet protectiveness that only fathers carry. "Come inside," he said softly. They sat in the study that evening, just the two of them. Tea on the table, a fire going even though it wasn't that cold. Because her father always said fires made hard conversations easier. He slid a document across the table. Savannah looked at it, then looked up at him. "It's time you understood the full picture," he said. She read slowly. Every page, and with each page, saw the full weight of what Damian had walked away from became clearer. Not just her. Not just the child she was carrying. The legacy. The access. The power. The generational wealth that would have elevated everything Damian had built into something history would have remembered. He had thrown it all away. For what? Because she was too quiet? Too soft? Because she didn't perform ambition loudly enough for him to recognize it? She set the document down, looked at her father. "What do we do now?" she asked. He looked at her with the steady, unshakable calm of a man who had never lost a single important battle in his entire life. "Nothing dramatic," he said. "We simply stop being invisible." Savannah nodded slowly, and in that moment, The last trace of the woman who had stood quietly by Damian's window disappeared. What sat in that chair now was something else entirely. A Whitmore. Fully, finally, completely. And across the city, Damian Cross was about to have the worst week of his life. And he didn't even know why. Not yet. It started with a phone call Damian didn't think twice about. His largest business partner, Marcus Reed, a man he had built a billion-dollar infrastructure deal with, called on a Tuesday morning and asked to reschedule their quarterly meeting. Damian didn't think twice. People reschedule. It happens. Then his second partner pushed back a contract signing. No explanation, just, we need a little more time. Still, Damian wasn't worried. He was Damian Cross. Things always worked out for Damian Cross. Then the third call came. This one was different. This one was from someone inside his own boardroom. A whisper. Careful, quiet, and nervous. The kind of call where the person speaking looks over their shoulder before every sentence. Damian, someone is moving against your key partnerships, quietly. I don't know who yet, but the word Whitmore keeps coming up. Damian froze. Whitmore. He said the name slowly in his mind, turned it over, searched his memory for where he knew it from. Business? Competition? Some new player entering his space? And then it landed. Savannah Whitmore. He sat back in his chair. No, that couldn't be right. Savannah was quiet. Savannah was simple. Savannah was the woman who cried at commercials and grew herbs on the kitchen windowsill and never once talked about money or business or power. That woman couldn't be connected to whatever was shifting in his world. Could she? He called his head of intelligence, a man he paid very serious money to know everything about everyone. Pull everything you can find on the Whitmore family. Full background. I want it in an hour. 40 minutes later, the man called back. His voice was different. Careful. The way people sound when they have information that scares even them. Damian, the Whitmore family. They're not in any public database. No Forbes listing. No press. Almost nothing searchable. A pause. But what I found underneath that silence? Another pause. Longer this time. Just tell me, Damian said quietly. The holdings, Damian. The scope of what this family controls. It's not billion-dollar territory. The voice dropped lower. It's beyond anything I've ever mapped. I'm talking infrastructure across 4 continents, energy interests, private stakes in companies you wouldn't believe. Another pause. Including 3 of your biggest partners. The room went cold. Damian stood up slowly from his desk. Walked to the window, his view. His empire spread out below him 40 floors down. And for the first time in his entire career, standing at the top of everything he had built, Damian Cross felt something he had never felt before. Small. Not because of the numbers, not because of the holdings or the continents or the quiet, invisible power of the Whitmore name, but because of one thought that hit him like a freight train and wouldn't stop. She knew. The whole time. Every dinner. Every cold silence. Every moment he had looked through her like she was furniture. She had known exactly who she was, and she had loved him anyway. He had thrown that away. He pressed his hand against the cold glass of his window and closed his eyes. What did I do? Not a question, a realization. The slow, devastating kind that doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives like winter. Quietly. Completely. And with no mercy at all. And what happens next? Damian Cross will never, ever recover from. The call came on a Thursday morning. Damian made it himself. No assistant, no lawyer, no buffer. Just him, sitting alone in his office at 7 a.m., before anyone else arrived, staring at a number he hadn't dialed in weeks. It rang 3 times. Savannah. Silence on the other end. Not uncomfortable silence. Not angry silence. Just the particular silence of a woman who has nothing to prove and nowhere to rush to. Damian. Her voice was calm. Warm even. The way you speak to someone you once loved deeply and have since forgiven completely. That warmth almost broke him. I need to understand, he said. His voice, the same voice that commanded boardrooms, that closed billion-dollar deals, that never once trembled in 20 years of business, was barely holding together. Who are you? A pause. I'm the woman you married, she said simply. I never hid that. Savannah. You just never looked, Damian. 7 words. 7 words, and they hit harder than anything his enemies had ever thrown at him. Because they weren't said with anger. They weren't a weapon. They were just the truth, spoken quietly, by a woman who had made peace with all of it. He had no response. What do you say to that? See, he sat in his 40-floor office surrounded by everything he had built, and he had absolutely nothing to say. 3 weeks later, the business world woke up to something it hadn't seen coming. Savannah Whitmore, not Savannah Cross Whitmore, was named as the sole successor to the largest private fortune in modern history. No press conference, no announcement tour, just a single document filed quietly that sent shockwaves through every major financial market on the planet. The Whitmore name came out of the shadows, and the world stopped. Phones lit up on trading floors. Analysts scrambled. Journalists who had never heard the name 24 hours earlier were now saying it every 30 seconds. Because the numbers attached to that name were not real. They couldn't be real, and yet they were. Damian saw it on every screen in his office simultaneously. He stood in the middle of his boardroom and watched the woman he had dismissed, discarded, and divorced become the most talked about person on the planet. Without a single dramatic move, without revenge, without even raising her voice. She had simply emerged, and the world had recalibrated around her exactly as she knew it would. Somewhere across the country, in the Whitmore estate, Savannah sat in a quiet chair by a window. Not so different from the window she used to sit at in Damian's apartment. Except everything was different now. She was different now. Her father sat nearby, reading. The fire was going. Outside, the 400 acres of Whitmore land stretched out green and endless and permanent. She felt the baby move. Strong. Certain. Like a statement. She placed both hands on her stomach and smiled. This child would never know what it meant to be invisible, would never shrink, would never fold themselves small to fit inside someone else's idea of who they should be. This child would know exactly who they were from day one. A Whitmore. And that meant everything. Damian Cross had signed the divorce papers thinking he had closed a chapter. But all he had done was open the most important one. The one where the quiet woman he underestimated took her place in the world. Not with noise, not with chaos. With something far more powerful than either. Silence, dignity, and a legacy that would outlast everything he ever built. The end. Some people spend their whole lives chasing power. Savannah Whitmore was born with it. She just waited for the right moment to let it show. And that moment was now.